The role of cities in climate change is crucially important because mitigation and adaptation in cities are combined. First, for example, in energy efficiency, if we create green roofs, if we put green roofs on top of city buildings, they simultaneously reduce energy use in the buildings while they are protecting the citizens, the inhabitants of people who live there, and keep them cooler. That's the adaptation side. The reduction in greenhouse gases, the mitigation side. As financing for climate change projects, both on the mitigation side and adaptation side, needs to come through a partnership of the cities, the municipality level, but also the provincial level, as well as the national level, and as well as an overarching international level through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's really when we get this telescoping scales down to the key actors, the key leaders who are the cities, that's the way we're going to be able to actually fund and create the investments that are going to be the implementation of climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Well, I think the start will have to be an assessment of vulnerability. What are the most vulnerable groups in society? What are the most vulnerable neighborhoods? And also what are the most vulnerable sectors and assets in a city? And based on that, an action plan, cities or the authority that is managing the budget in a city, could be the governor, could be the mayor, need to develop an action plan to integrate this into existing investments. Not so much an independent action plan where additional funding needs to be sought, but looking for opportunities to integrate these priorities based on vulnerability assessment into infrastructure investments. At the same time, there is also a whole soft way of integrating these concerns in terms of early warning systems, strengthening early warning systems in cities, which has to go hand in hand with investments in infrastructure. One of the sectors that needs special attention is drainage. Drainage is something that has been often forgotten but becomes more important with higher precipitations. And drainage is typically an area that requires heavy investments, long-term investments, and not easy to recoup these investments. So we need a new business model for drainage, because that's, in many cases, that's the first action that needs to be taken in terms of adapting cities to a changing climate.
First, let me put it this way, that there are different kinds of cities, let's say coastal cities or cities in the arid region, cities in the more high precipitation area. So there are different types of cities where the climate change impacts and the disaster risk approach, we need a bit more diversified approach. Again, that's a bit more geographical kind of aspects. Then again, within a city, we have different sections of society. Let's say people living in the slums are more prone and more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, because the basic services are not there. Also, their income, they are relatively poor than the rest of the city. So all those dimensions, bit more social issues, bit more equity issues, and also something coming out from the geographical location where city is located, those determines perhaps the nature of impacts and how people are affected. And also, in a sense, disaster risk reduction approach also has to take into account all those different dimensions. We often, feel very happy that maybe urban area has better access to energy compared to rural area, especially in the developing world. But still, many studies shows that close to, I would say, over 250 million people in cities still don't have access to the energy. Some of the study even shows that in order to provide even that access of energy to 250 to 270 million people, the investment needed will go in $1 trillion. So in a way, we have an opportunity to shape that investment is to more environmental friendly way, carbon friendly way. We have some kind of opportunities there. Decentralized energy system provides very good basis to plug in renewable into the urban energy system. So this new technologies coming up would provide much more strong role. We have not really addressed energy from the viewpoint of how to optimize the whole urban system. Not only transport, not only building, but how transport and building can come together. How the energy supply system and various energy utilization, systems can come together, and not really optimizing across sector or a small part of the urban system, but urban system as a whole. How to optimize, that is very important. For example, how we can set urban design or spatial configuration of city correct, which can actually reduce lots of energy compared to end of the pipe kind of approach we often use. Who controls the energy in cities? There is still a governance question, whether the municipal governments or the state or the national authorities or the private sector, and in many cases the role of local governments in many energy decisions are quite limited. So as we move more towards decentralized energy and making governance a bit more effective, then the local governments can play more important role in the energy related decision making. At the moment in the developing world, at least, what local governments can do for the energy sector still remains quite limited, but we do have lot of opportunities, and as I said before, that from now to 2050, 2.8 billion people will be going to be added in cities. That means we'll making new cities, we'll be developing rural settlements into urban settlements. If we do not allow cities from the very initial stage to lock into the energy intensive infrastructure, energy intensive pathways, then I think we have a huge opportunity to relieve the pressure at the end, what comes out from the urban metabolism or the urban dynamics. Historically, local governments did not make energy related decisions, so the information base is very poor at city scale. If you see in terms of greenhouse gas inventory, for example, very few cities in Asia actually have greenhouse gas inventories. Mostly cities in Japan, city in Korea. If you go to even Southeast Asia, they don't have a good inventory of greenhouse gas inventory, and if you go to South Asia, actually none. So many cities are, in a sense, try to even address climate change action plan or the energy related decision without really understanding bits and pieces of how the totality of system works. So I think what is important is to build some kind of information base on cities, because without knowing the details, without having number correct, you can't even see the effectiveness of what you have done. So this energy related information base, and for also the greenhouse gas inventory, is actually very important, and I think I hope that international institutions would work a little bit towards consolidating those information.
Disaster risk reduction should be seen from two angles. Big disasters get big coverage, but in the part of the global south, the disasters that we are experiencing are not big disasters. They are not the earthquakes, they are not the flooding, they are everyday risks that cascade into big disasters. Poor environmental management, making cholera, for example, everyday affairs in most of these cities. Poor housing conditions, making people stay in unsafe areas when they suffer flooding effects. And this has become so grievous because of the increasing urbanization, where people troop into the city and have a problem in housing, for example. So they have to make do with the informal settlements, where government do not provide for sanitation and other environmental services. And this generates into big disasters in terms of epidemics. So if, for example, you have in Ghana, cholera becoming everyday affairs when it comes to the rainy season. Last year, in 2011 and 12, about 3,000 cases of cholera were reported by the Ghana Health Services. And all these were very prevalent in the low-income communities where we have problem with housing and environmental services. And I think that it's becoming a challenge because of the increasing urbanization, and we need to tackle this from the grassroots, from the informal settlement. Once we're able to do that, I think we'll have a headway. And it's had a cascading effect also on even those who think that they are in the high income group, because our drains and have become the receptacles of our solid waste and the liquid waste, and that have also a rippling effect on the whole community.
I do believe that to manage this new situation, these new cities, we do have to work in an environment that has to be very friendly. That means that we have to make sure that nature is part of the cities. We also have to make sure that low carbon energies are being developed, and it's important that we work in that field in the energy sources we are producing, but also in transportation, on new type of mobility within the cities. And also what will be important, it's also very key, is social inclusion. We do not want to leave people aside. We need to provide jobs, we need to have growth in those cities, and this is part also of this inclusion.
Well, there are two key words for sustainable energy. One is renewable energies, and the other is energy efficiency. For power production in particular, the world has to change to renewable energies much more than it has so far. We have to phase out fossil fuels. Some fossil fuels like oil, they will be sort of not available perhaps 100 years from now anymore, so there is a natural need to change. Other fossil fuels like coal will be available much longer, but from the climate point of view, the humanity cannot afford to use them any longer. First of all, I think the priority is clearly with mitigation of global warming and with cutting emissions. The more successful we are on mitigation, the less we need to do on resilience. I think the connection is very clearly. But it's clear as well that climate change is coming, no matter how we turn around, how fast we turn around. So we need to be ready for a warmer world, and that means increasing the resilience, in particular for cities, because most cities are living on the coast, and half a meter of sea level rise would have severe consequences for the majority of the cities in the world. Well, first of all, I think the consensus is growing that there needs to be a major review of planning and standards for infrastructure and for buildings. And that is also a major issue, a major challenge for cities. That's both relevant for the mitigation side, because a lot of energy is used in cities, in buildings, and it's also true for the adaptation side and for building resilience. Who can do that? I think it's important to realize that governments alone cannot do that. Buildings are mainly, overwhelmingly, in the possession of private owners or corporations. So millions of owners, millions of investors have to get moving and have to make the right investments. And that's a big challenge. The governments, of course, have to deliver some of the finance, some of the funding will need to come through tax money, through budgets, but also they need to deliver the enabling conditions, and that mainly refers to the regulatory framework. So, for instance, on buildings, the standards for insulation against heat or against cold need to be strengthened, need to be improved, There is, of course, a limit to that, a technical limit, a financial limit, but we still have a way to go until we've reached that limit.